close enough for, I was going to say for
Government work.
government work.
One of my favorite things to say too.
That's a great expression.
Yes.
All right, why don't we get started? This is the June 18th, 2020 Ordinance Committee meeting. I'd like to call it to order. Roll call, Councilor Hamel.
Here.
Councilor Johnson.
Here.
And Chair Katerina is here. Approval of the minutes from April 16th, 2020.
Hold on, times.
Yeah,
Jean Marie, I just realized that we don't have Tracy. Are you taking minutes or shall I?
you better, please.
Then I need to grab a notebook, so hold on with these
Oh,
votes.
okay. Hold on, everybody.
But didn't she say she was going to be doing notes from the video? I seem to recall.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah, because Tracy's on the furlough hours and whatever makes it.
Said she
Well,
would-
on the off chance that we have something happen, I just want to at least
Yeah.
get the very basics written down.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Larissa.
Yep.
All right, so back to approval of the minutes from April 16th, 2020.
So moved.
Do I have a second? Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Oh, we have to do a roll call. Mr. Hamel?
Uh,
I'll do it. Yeah, that's fine. I'll do it. Mr. Hamel?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Katerina is a yes. Do we have any public comment? And I will remind people that I allow for 3 minutes per speaker. This is for the public, not town councilors. Right now, I don't see anyone here. Do we have anyone, Larissa?
we
you're-
don't have anyone with their hand up right now. We only have a couple of people in attendance and none of them have their hand raised.
Okay, so I'll give it one more second here. Anyone have public comment on anything on the agenda? Because it's going to be going, gone.
I see someone with a chat sign. Oh, no, never mind. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, Larissa's doing all that for us, Dawn, so. All right, since there's no public comment, I do very quickly want to say how we're going to run this. We've got to do this traffic first, then we will get into the growth management. I'm going to ask Jay to do his presentation. I thought it would be a little more efficient if we held questions until he's finished, which I know can be a little hard because something will come into your head. So if the two committee folks would, if you see something that you got a question on, scribble it down and then we'll get to him after he finishes. I will do committee member comments and questions first, and then other council members as time permitting. And again, I really apologize. This really, if ever happens to me, but I do have a dead stop at 5:15 today. And I apologize for that, but that's the way my world runs sometimes. So very quickly, Larissa, would you remind me what the traffic ordinance is and why it's
Be
here?
delighted. So Ordinance Committee took this up last winter, Chapter 601, the traffic ordinance, to make some adjustments to definition section, also some just housekeeping of getting the definitions alphabetized as opposed to being here and there. But then most importantly, needed to define where parking could take place overnight in designated parking spaces. As we have some more high density development taking place, part of the strategy for that is having overnight parking being permitted. And prior to that, we had an overall ban on overnight parking. But we also did carve out some spaces in the Pine Point area where you continue to not be allowed to park, even in designated parking spaces, and that was a beach access issue. So what's in front of you tonight, and Councillor Hamel, doing a very good job doing his councillor homework, did catch something that I would like if you guys would be willing to address.
Sure.
But it's exactly the same language that was in front of this committee last winter. If you'll remember, I took a bit of a tumble while hiking last January, and I didn't shepherd this through to council as I should have. So that is my bad. I really apologize for that. Thank you. I just wanted to get it blessed again before we sent it back to council. But it gave us a chance to catch something that Councillor Hill pointed out, which is if you look in your agenda packet on page 4, you'll see that we're in section 25, part A, section 25A, part 4, Pine Point. And we just omitted the words no parking at any time. So if you see that part 4, Pine Point, You'll see a strike through from May 1 to September 15, and you'll see new language saying letter A, and then new language saying letter B. And in that new language saying letter B, we need to have it read from May 1st to September 15th of each year, no parking at any time. That would be new.
So we need to add no parking at any time. there.
And then the colon. And then that list is where you just simply may not park anytime between from May 1 to September 15th. That is no overnight parking again, or no parking at any time.
All right. Can someone make a motion with that amendment for me?
That motion could read something like, I make a motion to move this on to council amended as read.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be fancy.
So moved.
You want me? I'll move it. I'll make the motion that we'll move this on to council with the amendment that section 4B, the addition of the wording, no parking at any time following from May 1st to September 15th of each year. Do I have a second?
Second.
And any discussion? Mr. Hamel, I know you're the Pine Point guy. Are we good with all of this?
I think we're okay. We went through this last year.
Yeah.
I think it's a codification more than anything. And yeah, I'd forgotten about it.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that it would never made it through last time. So I thought it was something new. But
Yeah.
This is what we worked on last year. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think
Okay.
we're
And just so you all know, your Deputy Chief O'Malley is hard at work finding other things that need to be revised in this ordinance. So you'll get a chance to look at it all over again in the following winter. So it's just one of those things that just keeps coming back at you.
All right. Are we ready for a vote on this? Mr. Hamel,
yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
and Council, what's my name? Counselor Katarina says yes also, so that passes unanimously. So if we could move that up to council would be great. All right, next is the growth management ordinance. And before Jay starts, it's just a reminder that this is part of the regular review. This is supposed to be reviewed once every 3 years. And I know that we have some counselors this year who've had some concerns of potentially regarding growth management, what's going on in the town. Are we up to date on what we should be doing? Does it need to be changed or addressed? I did ask for comments from various, the counselors, and I got some good feedback that we can talk about later. But what I would like to start with now, as I mentioned, is Jay's presentation. And Jay, if you wouldn't mind, if you could just write a little note, because I thought of this right before we started, how this all goes back to the comp plan, because the more I'm looking at this, I'm thinking we got to get this comp plan out. And then how, what's going to happen tomorrow with long range planning. So, all right, so go ahead. It's all yours, Jay.
All right. I'm going to try to share my screen here and kick off the presentation. And before I do that, this presentation, I sort of put a little bit of a polish on the presentation that I conducted a few months ago for the Board of Education and Town Council, really sort of springboarding off of that discussion as this committee really starts to talk about what this process is going to look like going forward and what type of questions and analysis we want to look at throughout the process. So if you bear with me, I'll try to share my screen and go from there. Let's see. I don't think I did that successfully. Oh, wait, are you seeing my?
I see it.
Okay,
You're
excellent.
not in presentation mode yet though, Jay.
I am not. Let me get there.
I'm glad it's not just me who does this.
There we go. You're probably still seeing, this is good. Was that
Yes,
better or worse than what you were seeing?
I don't mind it this way. This is fine.
Okay. I have two screens and
Yep.
it's sort of jumping around on me here. So if you're good with what you're seeing, I'm going to proceed accordingly. So just a quick agenda. Just going to run through where the town is at in terms of within the growth within the regional context. Quick overview of the growth management ordinance itself. Talk a little bit about, or a bit about the reserve pool, what that means and what's been occurring with the reserve pool. Talk a bit about fractional units, fractional growth permits, how those work and what we've seen with those. Then just talk a bit about the type of development trends and permitting history we've had over the last decade or so with regards to growth permits. And then just sort of finish with a discussion about what type of analysis and questions we want to explore moving forward. So with that, I'll launch in. As I'm sure we're all aware, Scarborough's long been a fast growing community. So here's our trends over the last 5 or 6 decades. And then more acutely or within the more recent time frame, you can see within the last 8-10 years, or from 2010 to 2018, Scarborough's been growing quickly, as have other communities within the region. So this isn't something that's unique to Scarborough, but certainly we all have our own challenges, but just thought it'd be helpful to understand what's happening throughout the region. And then again, something we talked about a few months ago, we're also an aging community. You can see our percentage of youth of the population is declining, and percentage of those who are 65 and older are increasing. So just sort of understanding a little bit about what's been happening. So now, like I said, I'll just talk a little bit about the growth management history and as I understand how the ordinance came to be. As we saw before, Scarborough was growing very rapidly through the 80s and 90s, and acutely between the year 2017 and 2002, there was 1,100 new single-family homes that were created in town, and a total of 1,200 units. That was putting pressures on the community, and particularly with regards to the schools, as well as other departments having to keep up with that development demand in terms of being able to have public safety or public works crews to be able to attend to the matters. And so those type of pressures led to ultimately what led to the Growth and Services Report, of which the Growth Management Ordinance is sort of one of the primary outcomes. So just an overview of the Growth Management Ordinance. So growth management ordinances are allowed by state statute, but they need to, you need to permit some level of growth. State statute essentially says if you're going to have a growth management ordinance, the number of permits that are to be available has to be at least 105% of the number of permits that have been issued over a 10-year period. And so that might be something we want to look at as part of this process to see where we're at. We can talk about that as we go along. But the growth management ordinance, in essence, exists to pace the rate of housing construction in town. As I said, it provides for immediate housing needs. Therefore, as I said, you need to allow for some type of development. It's also designed to ensure fairness in the allocation of building permits, and we'll talk about that. And then to plan for continued residential growth in the community. So how do we address those things I just spoke about? We have an annual allocation of growth permits of 135 that are available. Limits individual developments to 20% of an annual allocation, and that's within a given subdivision. That's 27 permits. It directs housing to the growth areas of the community by only allowing a maximum of 50%, 50, not 50%, 50 permits in the limited growth areas or low growth areas as identified in the comprehensive plan. And then as the current ordinance includes a reserve pool, which is designated for special projects, and they need to meet certain criteria. And so those criteria include developments that are using some type of density incentive. We have affordable housing density incentives as well as development transfer. Development transfer is really about the conservation of open spaces. Projects that are providing for affordable housing, and then contract zone projects as well.
Hey, I had a question. Jay, if I may, Madam Chair, ask Jay a quick.
Dawn, let's wait till he gets done,
question.
please.
Okay,
Jot it down so you don't forget it.
I forget. Never mind.
All right.
Okay, great. Okay, so the reserve pool, I know that's something that we've talked a little bit about in the past. So just get you up to speed how this came to be. So prior to 2008, there wasn't a reserve pool. What the ordinance said is prior that any unused growth permits were carried forward year to year. And so it didn't necessarily create a reserve pool, it just made that annual allocation larger as we went. In 2008, Town Council made some amendments to the growth management ordinance and created a fixed reserve pool and eliminated the year-to-year carry forward. And that number was somewhere in the 200, 215 number. I need to do a little bit more research to get the exact number on that, but somewhere in that order. The other thing the 2018 amendment did when it created the reserve pool sort of identified that with the limitation of 20% of the annual allocation to any one development, that could potentially restrict the size of multifamily developments that are otherwise permitted in our zoning ordinance. And so that was part of the discussion and also part of the fractional growth permits discussion, which we'll get into in just a minute here once I go through another slide or two on reserve pool. So the reserve pool, in 2017, Town Council, based on a number of factors I'll talk about in a moment, increased the reserve pool from 215 permits to 500 permits. And as I went back through the documentation that led to that consideration, it's really it was identified that there was increasing market demand for multifamily. It was sort of seen as a potential blip in demand. It was also talked about that, had growth permits continued to roll over year as they did prior to the 2008 amendment, there would have been some 700 or more additional permits available, which would have been ample to address the demand that was being seen at the time. And then another thing we'll talk about in just another couple slides here is the research really indicated that the 1 and 2 bedroom units that we're seeing with these multifamily demand really tends to have a less demand for services and increased tax valuation. So that was that was all part of the conversation that was before council back in 2017. So again, before I jump into the fractional units, just to update where we're at with the reserve pool allocation. Again, as I said, there were 500 units, 500 permits in the reserve pool back in 2017. 319 and a half of those have been used or accounted for to date. 52 of those accounted for are Piper Shores Phase 2. They haven't pulled those permits yet, but they're working towards those. But those 319 permits have resulted in or will result in 493 total units. And we'll talk about that, why there's more units than permits issued when we talk about the fractionalization. So just a little update on that and where we stand with the reserve pool currently. Okay, so the fractionalization or fractionalized growth permits, that was also part of the 2008 amendments. And what that amendment did was tie the growth permit formula to the residential density factors of the zoning ordinance. And what the zoning ordinance essentially says is if you have a a 1-bedroom unit that's less than 750 square feet. For density purposes, that only counts as a half a unit. 2 bedrooms and less than 1,200 square feet for density purposes counts as 2/3 of a unit, and anything over those thresholds would count as a whole unit. So now with the amendment of 2008, not only does it count towards your that fractionalization count towards your density, but it's also the portion of a growth permit that needs to be pulled for a unit of these sizes. And these factors apply to multifamilies. They don't apply to single families, single-family homes. So again, looking back at the information that was provided to council as part of the conversation, and again, these are sort of things that we may want to think about, seeing what current literature says. Really what helped inform the 2008 decision to fractionalize permits was really looking at sewage loads, the number of occupants that might be expected in a given unit, and the amount of vehicular trips that are generated from different types of units. And you can sort of see those laid out here. I'm not necessarily going to go through those in depth as part of this conversation, but maybe this is something we want to explore as the conversation progresses. So I just want to be sure I didn't skip a slide there. So sort of getting towards the end of my piece of the presentation before we start, the conversation here. Just give you an overview of where we're at in recent development trends. Here's the recent multifamily developments that have occurred in the community. As you can see, 2017 and 18 were very, there's a lot of multifamily growth in those years, a lot of units developed. A lot of those are attributed to the Beacon development up at the intersection of Higas and Payne. And in 2000 in that time frame is when the Downs project started to come online, particularly with the first phase of residential development. Let's see. And so here's just a quick snapshot of some pipeline projects that are sort of either in the planning board queue or parts of conversations with staff. And so this is just sort of a quick analysis of what's sort of out there and what we might see in the near future. And let's see, I think this is my last sort of informational slide. These are, this is the growth permits and units that have been created from 2008 through, I think the 2020 numbers, I think, are through Monday, I think they are. And so what you're seeing here is in orange, is the total number of growth permits that have been issued. Councillor Johnson astutely asked a question after I gave this presentation the first time, asking about the Hillcrest state manufactured housing development and how they factored into the growth, excuse me, the growth permit discussion. And based on digging around, it turns out they state manufactured housing doesn't pull growth permits. So what the yellow is showing is actually the true number of permits that were issued in a given year. And what the gray is showing you is the true number of units that were developed in a given year. So again, the yellow isn't growth permits, it's total housing permits. Okay, so as you remember back in, again, whenever we had that discussion with the Board of Education, provided this same data, and I'm really just providing it here as an example of the type of thing that we might want to further explore. I've already started some conversations. This data, well, before I talk about what conversations I've started, this data here is intended to, one of the questions that we tried to answer is, where were the incoming kindergarten class was identified to be a large incoming class, and sort of where were those students coming from? And the analysis really demonstrated that, at least this is as of last summer, that it wasn't necessarily the new multifamily development wasn't where the students were coming from. It was really actually, we found that I think it was 92% of the students were coming from housing stock that was at least 5 years old. And I think it was 96% were coming from single family homes. So just thinking about what those impacts are, but certainly this is something, as I was about to say, I've started conversation with the folks in the school department, see if we couldn't expand this information to include all the total student population for the coming year. But those are conversations that started. We're trying to get together and figure out how we do that. So my final slide, I really just started to jot some thoughts. Some of this is based on some of the emails I saw from counselors, my own thoughts as to where we want to go from here, what type of information would be helpful to inform the conversation. And as I think has already been mentioned, the Long Range Planning Committee has a meeting tomorrow morning, going to go through this presentation. I know Don and Jean Marie are both liaisons to that committee, and so it'd be helpful to understand sort of what the expected roles are for Long Range Planning Committee, Ordinance Committee, full council, staff. I guess with that, I would turn it back to you, Madam Chair, and I can stop sharing, or I can leave this
That's
up.
okay. Yeah, why don't you leave that up? One last thing that, if you wouldn't mind, is the comp plan, because I know all the state statutes and everything to do with these growth developments, the MRSA 30A subsections to do with this, all point back to the comp plan. And where are we with our comp plan? And, should they, so what's the chicken and what's the egg with some of this?
Sure. So, I guess what I'll say in terms of the comprehensive plan, the town currently has an adopted comprehensive plan from 2006. I think as we've been working through an update to the comprehensive plan, and I believe it was March 6th, if I have my date correct, the Long Range Planning Committee basically, blessed, their advisory committee only. They've been working on it for a few years. They felt that it was after the initial round of public comment and feedback and surveying, that there are some really significant changes from the first draft we received in 2018 from our consultants. The committee did a lot of work, again, with community outreach and talking with other committees and getting their feedback. There was quite a bit of redrafting of the plan. And so that plan is now, the committee feels as though it's ready for public engagement and council discussion moving forward. And that was right before I think we all left our offices for a few months. So I guess that, I think staff and Long Range Planning Committee are ready to pick that conversation back up. But really looking for.
Can I ask you, can these move forward in tandem, or should one come before the other?
No, so I would certainly say, if we, obviously with the interest of the growth management ordinance, as was noted, one of the things that it does need to get, have a review every 3 years. So I think this is, this is timely. I will say that the updated comprehensive plan really builds off the foundation of the 2006 comprehensive plan in terms of where growth areas are. And so it really sort of is starting the new the revised comprehensive plan is really looking sort of at systems and how do we think about transportation issues and other type of housing issues and natural resource preservation, those sorts of things in a more holistic way. Yeah, I think, this is the, obviously there's been interest on council to get this conversation started.
Okay, thanks. Gentlemen, I will start with Ken, since you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you, Jay. This was helpful. And I really like this last page. Great suggestions, because we're going to be bringing some items for some long-range planning feedback and advice. So I actually identified with several of these. So thank you. I'd like to start with the comprehensive plan. And I want to stress how valuable that comprehensive plan is, fellow councilors and all that's listening. Because we hear about it every time we
Mhm.
have a developer coming before us or planning about an exception. It's always used in that framework. In the 2020, and I know it's still a work in progress and with some changes, and there will be more changes. Thank you very much. I noticed that there's a 7-part strategy for the vision of the comprehensive plan. And strategy 7 is future zoning changes will be adapted as necessary to implement the vision and strategies set forth in this plan. Just from your sense, could you tell me what that means? I mean, we have existing zoning.
Yep.
And we don't have to get into a comprehensive plan discussion. I'm not trying to do that. I saw zoning because, again, I know this is the framework that our planning department uses to help maximize the value of that land through development. So I've got that. So I was just wondering what that meant for future zoning changes. Have we identified areas in town that aren't zoned correctly for certain development? Is that what that means?
Well, I think if you look at the growth and conservation map, it really, as I said, very much reflects a lot of what was in the 2006 plan.
Right.
But certainly, one of the things that's sort of talked about is, and I think you just touched on it, in growth areas, are there ways to try to more efficiently use the land and have development strategies that can help address other goals of the community, such as preservation of the rural character of the community, try to reduce impacts of traffic. If you have, are you able to get people out of single occupancy vehicles and have sort of live work occur where people don't have to necessarily drive for every place they go? And that doesn't mean that's everywhere in the community. There's, as I said, there, the plan really identifies a difference between growth areas and limited growth areas. And so I do think that's really what that's talking about, is what are those type of strategies that can help the town continue to move forward towards addressing sort of the 5 key, if you, right at the beginning of the comprehensive plan there's sort of 5 key goals,
Right.
And some of those strategies are around preservation of our natural areas.
Right.
So I think those are the type of things.
Okay.
The comprehensive plan, as you said, really lays out the broad picture. So I wouldn't say there's necessarily any specific pieces. That's all part of ongoing discussions that would have to occur.
Okay. I'm just going to keep going until Jean Marie tells me it's not my turn, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
In your presentation where you show the allocation of the permits, and that's post fractionalization, correct? Because we're talking permits and not units.
Are you talking about this slide right here?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. So what you're seeing is in gray are the total units,
Okay.
and what you're seeing in orange are fractional growth. Those are growth permits. So those.
Yep.
So
Okay.
exactly, 1 growth permit could equal 2 units potentially.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I'm clear on that now. So before, and we don't have to go back to a different slide, but when you listed out all the in-flight projects, I'm assuming that these numbers do not reflect any of those, correct?
That is correct.
So when are they counted? Is it the time of the issuance of the building permit that then replaces the growth permit, something like that?
Yeah, essentially what happens, sort of the mechanics of our growth permit ordinance is that you can purchase a growth permit before you get your building permit. Typically what we see is that they come in simultaneously.
Yeah.
So occasionally, in a calendar year, you could see the numbers slide off a little bit if someone decides to grab growth permits and they come in for their building permit a month or 2 later. That's when they would catch up
Okay.
and sync up. But yeah, so it's not even at the time of planning board approval that those units would show up on these slides. A good example is Piper Shores, right? I sort of talked about how those are 52 accounted for reserve. permits, but those don't show up in this slide because they have not yet been allocated.
Okay,
Uh,
so
officially.
I was trying to derive out of the 180 available, when I think you call that out.
Yep.
How many are kind of like keepers? I mean, I'm assuming you're addressing everything that's in flight, like
If-
Mr. Risbera, I think he's on the meeting.
Gosh, where's
You know, I mean, he has plans for additional build out. I know the
Yep.
Sawyer Cottage, they've got 92.
So yeah, I guess again, from a mechanics standpoint, the reserve pool, I'm going to actually go back to another slide here. Here we go. If you look down at the bottom, you'll see those 3 red
Yep.
points. So the reserve pool in the growth management ordinance, it talks about how the planning board has the authority to approve or say to determine which projects are eligible from the reserve pool. And
Correct.
in the growth management ordinance, it spells out really 4 ways that can happen. I really highlight 3 of them because one of them is pre-approved projects, talking about projects before, that are,
Yep.
those don't exist really anymore. So it's really around, so Piper Shores is a great example of a contract zone project. That's where, as part of that process, the town council wrote right into the contract zone, this project is eligible for the reserve pool.
Yep.
Projects that use density incentives. I think a good example is Carrier Woods off of Muzzy Road. They've provided some affordable housing in that project to get density bonuses. So that project then became eligible to pull from the reserve pool,
Okay.
if I recall correctly. And then affordable housing projects, I think, this could be an example might be the South Portland Housing Authority project that's being developed. That might be a project that may become eligible should that conversation occur as part of the planning board process.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. But the numbers we're looking at down at the chart, those were actually units and permits, not necessarily coming from the reserve pool, correct?
Right. This is
Okay.
a combination.
Okay.
Yep, that this includes all from the annual allocation plus the reserve pool. So 2017 is a great example. Anytime we go over that blue dotted line, that blue dotted line is intended to show you the 135 units.
Gotcha.
The only way we go over that blue dotted line is if we've dipped into the reserve pool. So you can see that that occurred a little bit in 2015, but then obviously 17, 18, and 19.
And is this calendar year or is this driven off fiscal year also?
So this is a calendar year, is the way the growth permits work, is calendar year.
So then just a quick question, and I think Tom might even be here if he can answer. I thought I just received an email from Tom showing that in 2020, we've had 93 single family homes built. Nothing about multifamily, senior housing. Was that, anybody else recall seeing that? Never mind, I'll follow up with you.
No,
that, Jay.
Tom, why don't you go ahead and answer that? Tom's here. You gotta unmute yourself there. Thanks.
I don't recall sending that. If I had that information, Jay would have provided it to me.
Okay, maybe it's just misinformation on me, fake news on me, I'm sorry. My bad. I'm good for right now. I'm gonna come back, but thank you very much, Jay. Very informative.
Councilor Gleisten just chatted that she thinks that was home sales, 92.
What was the number?
92?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen the annual home
Oh,
sale.
home sales?
Yeah, it could have been
Oh. See?
existing homes.
Okay, I'm good for right now,
All right.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Counselor Hamel.
Hi, thanks. I had a couple questions, Jay. One was, can you give an example of a limited growth area? Now, I know that we've identified growth development zones. It'd be like the Downs, I imagine, but can you give a couple of examples of limited growth areas?
Sure. By and large, west of the Turnpike is a limited growth area. There's a few pockets, but by and large, around the really sort of, let's see, sort of east of Route 1 near the marsh, down by the Pleasant Hill area, as you head towards Spurwink Road. That would be another example of a limited growth, low growth areas. And certainly if, I could pull up that mapping, but it might take me a little bit of time, but
Okay, those are good examples.
largely, one way to think about the town's growth areas, if you really just kind of want to simplify the community, it's, you really think between Route 1 and 95, by and large, that's where our growth areas are. Again, there's pockets outside of that, so I don't mean that to be, inclusive, but without looking at the map and having it before us, that might be just an easy sort of reference point.
Great. Thank you. Thanks. I had a couple other questions. One was, can you give us a little detail? I mean, you can see how the swing in 2000, you mentioned there was like some amendments in 2007 and 2008. Can you talk about the amendments that were, how do those come about? The amendments to the growth areas? Are they, typically how are they sponsored? How do they originate? Can you speak to that?
So I just want to be sure I'm clear. So in 2008, there was amendments to the growth management ordinance. I heard you say to the growth areas. Are you referring to the?
MO, sorry.
Okay, yep. So those were generated out of, so the conversations largely started with the Long Range Planning Committee. And I'm not sure I'm not sure if that was something that council had requested that be looked at, or if that was sort of what the impetus for getting that before the Long Range Planning Committee was. But the Long Range Planning Committee spent some time looking at those amendments. And then those recommendations were brought up to the council level. Of course, all ordinance changes are done at the council level. And then there was the council discussion in the process and adoption thereof. Okay.
And then last question, Jay, could you flip for this question? Could you flip to your last slide that shows the things that need to be done? So it occurred to me as we're trying to figure out what we wanted to focus on here around growth that, this isn't kind of what's happened here in town with permitting and fractionality and pools and stuff like that. Isn't that really just a function of the fact that the building cycle, there are building cycles, right? It's a cyclical business. So we kind of do things that basically address some of the need for more permits to allow, housing stock to be built. But what happens during the downturn? Now that we're in COVID land here, do we ever sort of, remove amendments or make additional amendments to the GMO? In your experience, have we ever kind of worked the other side of the curve?
So let's see. So the last time the ordinance was really worked on was 2008. And I'd say that was, I think we remember sort of that was not the greatest times then. So I would say we really haven't worked. There haven't been many significant changes since then. There was an amendment in 2017 that you'll see listed, but that was really around making the ordinance gender neutral.
Okay.
Yeah. One thing I did want to say is, and I think you started to touch on it, and that was part of the conversation back in 2017 when the council gave consideration to increasing the reserve pool at that time, was that the vacancy rate for multifamily was really at, if I remember right, seeing the memos from back around 1%, extremely low. It was really very much an identified need for the region in terms of housing stock or housing choice. And so I think that's where that part of that conversation in 2017 generated around that.
Tom, you
Yeah,
wanted
just
to
very
add
quickly,
something?
I started in November 2008, so those changes happened in the spring, early summer, as I recall. So I was not personally involved. I do recall, though, there were some very detailed memos and support materials that Dan Bacon prepared that might give a hint as to what the impetus or what the driver was for taking the matter up and also kind of the direction taken at the time. So we can unearth those and share them. And then just more recently in 2017, that was directly in response to a requested contract zone, but also, as Jay has alluded to, a very kind of clear understanding that the greater Portland area, there was this multifamily phenomenon undertaken. And part of what we talked about is that we saw a fairly small window for that to occur because those units would be built out and there would be the demand will have been met. And I think if you see what's happened on one of those charts that Jay showed, year to date 2000, in fact, at least for Scarborough, the multifamily interest has dried up considerably. There's some limited activity, but not of the scale that we saw 2017 and 18.
Okay. Dawn, are you all set with your
Thanks, Jay.
questions? Because I have a few. Can I ask mine, Ken, or do you want to sneak something in there?
Oh, go right ahead.
Oh, thank you. Mine, I hope, are pretty easy. Well, I don't know how easy they are. I know I'm going back to the state regulation, which is MRSA 38 sub 4360, which has to do with growth management ordinances. And you referred to it, Jay. And it's that 105% of, look at the previous 10 years. Well, I did some quick math, which, as you know, anyone who knows me, it's dangerous if Jean Marie does any math. How do you figure that 217? 217 is such an outlier if you were looking at coming up with a mean.
Yep. So what I just sort of went through that iteration. I started to do some maybe a little bit more than back of the napkin, but start to do some math myself. So what we would look at is the actual number of permits issued, not the number of units, because that's how state statute says
Right.
it. So we would be looking, we take the average of the yellow. That was, I think, as I mentioned before, something that Councilor Johnson had picked up on. So yellow includes not just our growth permits, but also the permits that have been issued for Hillcrest.
Okay.
So we would take the average of the yellow, and if you bear with me, but one of the other things you need to do as part of this, you actually subtract out, and this is a weird piece that I need to sort of work through a little bit, but in the state statute, it says you take the total number of permits over, or the average of the total number of permits over 10 years. However, you subtract out any permits that have been issued for affordable housing.
Right.
So that's one of the pieces that I need to go through. I have some of those numbers. Where I started to run the numbers based on the yellow and subtracting out what I know of for affordable housing, though I need to, like I said, do a little bit more digging on that. The number comes out around, and I have if you bear with me just a moment.
I thought I asked an easy question, but I'm sorry.
Nope, I think this is one of the key pieces that we'll
Yeah.
want to do as part of this. Again, understanding that I still need to do the affordable housing component. Once I ran the numbers, and that I came out to about 128 permits granted per year. And when you
Okay.
multiply that by the 105 that's required by state requirement, that gets you to 134.4 permits
Oh.
annually.
All
So
right.
our number seems to be about right. Now, again,
Okay.
don't quote me exactly on those numbers, because I do need to
Yeah.
dive a little bit deeper on it, but it should be in that order of magnitude.
Okay, thank you. My next question has to do with the growth of elders in town, the number of elders. How much of that, and you may not know the answer to this, is due to congregate living, i.e. the Piper Shores and whatever of the world? I mean, are those census numbers you've got, or are those related to housing units? But I wouldn't know how you'd get that, that knowing that it was old people who bought that house and not young people, unless
Yeah.
someone told you. So,
So I'm not exactly sure how Piper Shores or say Scarborough Terrace.
Yeah.
I think Piper Shores, my guess is those numbers are probably in that, but Scarborough Terrace or something, Maine Veterans, the Veterans Home.
yeah, I mean, I was just,
That I'm not sure of, and I guess I would want to confer with Karen Martin. She
yeah,
often helps with these
Yeah.
type of numbers, and we
All right.
can piece that together.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a question that popped in my head as you were going through numbers. And then Hillcrest. What sort of permit do they get? Or is
So
it the electrical, plumbing?
they get a building permit.
Okay,
So
all
they
right,
get a building permit.
okay. But they aren't considered part of growth
They don't,
permits, correct?
correct.
Is
right.
that by state statute or
So
is that?
that's actually one of the questions that current staff needs to dig into.
Okay,
The way prior the 2008 amendments, prior to those amendments, affordable senior housing, I don't have the language embedded in my mind, but something to the effect of senior housing anyway. I can't remember if it's affordable senior, but senior housing was exempt from having to get growth permits.
right.
And where that project was in place and currently underway, it may be that it was considered grandfathered. So
Yeah, I just thought that would be an interesting question to ask. And I only have one more here. I just could find it. Sorry, because you already answered a lot of my questions. In the fractionalization, this is, again, I noticed we count as 0.67, a 1,200 square foot 1 unit, but then we have 1,200 square foot 2 units that are counted as 1. And why is there a difference? It's in fractionalization right there.
yep.
See
So
that 2 bedroom, 1,200 is 0.67, 3 bedroom, but it's still 1,200 is 1 unit. Why aren't we counting the 2 bedroom as 1 unit?
So what the way the ordinance reads, it's if you're 1 bedroom and less than 750 square
Right.
feet, you're half a unit. So if it's 1 bedroom and 800 square feet, it's going to
Yeah.
actually count towards 2/3 of a unit.
Yeah,
So then it's 2 bedrooms and less than 1,200 square feet is 2/3.
oh, I see,
of a
less
unit.
than and greater than. Okay,
So if you're, let's say you have a 3 bedroom that's 1,000 square feet,
yep,
that's going to count as a whole unit because you have to meet both parameters,
Okay.
bedrooms and size. So anything over 2 bedrooms or anything over 1,200 square feet is automatically going to be 1 unit.
okay, great. That's it for my questions. I know I see 2 counts. I'm sorry, Ken, I forgot you. I'm sorry, go.
I thought I could come back.
Yes, you
While you're
can.
right there on that slide, Jay, if you could, the underlying model that built that, determined, the sizing or the fractional of it. I think you've got it in there. It says how many by size, how many people live in the unit. You know what I mean?
Yep, I think is this the slide you're talking
Yeah,
about?
right here.
Yep. So this,
Number of occupant, you're right.
so I'll just mention that these data points, as Tom just alluded to, and certainly staff will make available to the ordinance committee and others as well. These were sort of the data points that were provided as part of the 2008 amendment process to the growth management process.
Right.
So it's sort of talking about the fractionalization. I will mention, and this is something that we can dive further into, the fractional, the density factors in the zoning ordinance, I'll say, which is, this is based on the zoning ordinance, that actually occurred in 2007. So there's probably more data that was baked into that process and understanding sort of what those impacts were. So we'll sort of unearth that. But again, just really wanted to provide these numbers to show, this is a type of thing that was used
Right.
10, 12 years ago. Is this the type of information that, as part of this process, maybe we should be looking back at the literature to see if, is it still sort of bearing the same numbers, at least in literature? And then what do we want to do in terms of looking at what's happening in the town of Scarborough or within the greater Portland region? Do those numbers reflect what's in that literature? And
Yeah, that's a good point. Matter of fact, that's what I was going to suggest. If you remember the joint workshop that we had with the school board on growth. Outside the migration and new birth was definitely development. And they were questioning why now, at the time, probably made sense. We use some national level metrics, probably from a similar population or something. But now that we're at about 22,000, we can probably glean some more accurate numbers. Because if you recall, school board was really shaking their head when the discussion around 2-bedroom units do not impact the schools as assumed, or as this reflects. An awful lot of that is why this reflects 2/3 of a unit. They said, they have a list as long as their arm with kids coming in from 2-bedroom units, which segues into your school growth little pie chart with the kindergartners. I think there's 231 kindergartners. This is a good job. I like this. We went over this, I do believe, also with the joint workshop.
Yeah.
And I remember a takeaway was that you and a counterpart in the school was going to ask to try to blow this through the other grade levels. Is there any status on that, or did the world turn upside down before you could get going on that one? Probably.
So, yep, so if you remember, so the woman from the school department, Rebecca, who I was working with, we're actually trying to set up a meeting for next week to.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep. So
good.
we're going to start. Conversations started. We remembered that request, and now's basically really wanted to be sure that that's the type of information we still want to drive at. It seems to make sense to me. It sure would help to inform that school impact piece. I know there's other impact
Right.
pieces to look at, but it would certainly help inform that. So that's something we're anticipating
Right.
working on. And
Hey, if that's an open meeting, you can extend an invite. I'd love to be a non-participant observer, but if not, definitely share the results of that. Appreciate it.
Sure, yeah, and again, this is really about how do we take their school data and their
Right.
data for their school children and match that with our housing data. So it's certainly it's information that would be shared once the data is available.
Keep the metrics more local. I agree with that.
Yep.
Back to the original GMO for a minute. I know one of the bullet points for the purpose was to also ensure that no single developer received 20% of the growth permits of that time. And I believe that was even before fractionalization. I mean, it just looked like it was more of a fair distribution across developers. Okay, and that's a good thing. But now that we're in this master plan model, which I'm not quite sure how we got there, but that's where we are. My understanding of the master plan is you can have the same developer running simultaneous subdivisions, with each subdivision benefiting from the 20% allocation. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yep, and that's something that we worked through maybe a year or more ago with the town attorney to try to really figure that out and sort of say, is this a viable process given the language? And so that was, so as you just pointed out, once there can be multiple subdivisions within an overall project that can then each get allocated that 20%.
Right. Do you have anything that fell out of those meetings with the attorney on that subject that you could share?
Other than that's a viable process. I mean, that was really the question staff had at the time when the request came. We sort of said, well, okay, the language, given what the language reads, we wanted the legal interpretation. So
right,
really what came out of it is, yes, that is viable.
I can definitely understand sometimes it's hard to unwind something. Not that I'm suggesting I want to unwind it, but definitely unwind it. I just don't know how we balance that spirit of the GMO, which is that fair distribution across developers. It's not fair distribution across developments. So, okay, thank you for that. I had a whole bunch of questions and my laptop died on me.
Uh-oh. Well, I just wanted to let people know we're almost at 5 o'clock. And I need to have people, I'd like to wind up comments, whatever, by 5:10. So then we can just wind up because Jean Marie has to run. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll wrap mine
And
up.
we, but hold your thought for just a minute, Ken, because I know we've got two other counselors in the audience. I know Betsy's got her hand up. John
Oh,
doesn't.
absolutely.
So, no, I mean, you're on the committee, so you come
No,
first.
good.
So, okay.
No,
So
I
I
just
just
wanted to
wanted
let
to
you know
double
that
check that.
that I've reached out to the BOE and they would love to have a discussion
Yeah.
with us on this topic,
Okay.
purely growth. So we will arrange
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And I hope you didn't lose all your questions because it would be great, later, just send them out, to us, to Jay.
No, I'll go through protocol and get to Jay. Thank
Okay.
you.
Jean Marie?
Larissa.
Yes, just quickly, I want to make sure that we didn't lose sight of one of the things that Jay kind of launched his presentation with. So he is meeting with the Long Range Planning Committee tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. And I think that there really is some hope that, and I realize that we are running out of time very quickly here, that there's some sort of message to engage them with tomorrow.
Right.
Is that where you and Dawn are both liaisons?
Yes.
Will you be kind of
I'll be
spearheading
there.
that
I'm going to be
message, or-
there. I'm going to be there at that meeting. So,
Okay. I think that there's some interest in kind of knowing which direction we're heading.
yeah.
And then also we have kind of in the background today, an intern that we have for the summer for 150 hours, whose sole project is working on research and so forth to inform this discussion.
Nice.
So if you guys want to I just wanted to let you know his name is Chris St. Pierre. He's a graduate student at Muskie.
I
So-
see you there. I see your name, Chris. Thank you for being here.
Okay.
Dawn, do you have something or can I go to Betsy?
You can go to Betsy, but just a quick question. Will we have a chance to make summary comments before?
Yes. Yeah, I want to, that's why I'm just giving people the heads up. So Betsy, very quickly, if you could, I'll give you about maybe 3 minutes. Can you bring Betsy in, Larissa?
You're muted,
Whoop,
Larissa.
You're muted, Larissa.
Do you want me to bring her in as a panelist?
Yes, bring her in. Bring her in.
Okay.
And should I keep this spread PowerPoint up?
Yeah,
while doing that?
please.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'm not sure if she's gonna.
Well, maybe I'll leave it here.
Okay, thanks. So Jay, I had a question. So I just want to make sure I understand this terminology. So if I want to build a 4-unit multifamily that has each is going to have 1 bedroom and it's going to be less than 150 feet and there's going to be 4 of them, that's going to be 4 building permits and 2 growth units. Is that right?
Not quite. So just a couple of things. So I believe you meant 1 bedroom and less than 750
Yeah,
square
sorry.
feet, not
I'm
necessarily
sorry,
150,
less than
but
750.
either way. So it would be, you have the growth permits. If it's under 1 roof, it's one building permit. So so for a multifamily, it's just a building permit. Each unit gets a growth permit.
Okay, so yeah, I would definitely like to understand that state law. So that means our average would actually be quite a bit higher than I guess if we're going by permit. So I thought Jean Marie kind of touched on that, and I thought that was important.
So if I could just, I think, so the yellow here on this slide identifies the number of growth permits. So the growth permits are going to be greater than building permits. So for example, the 361 growth permits in 2017, some 200 of those are probably within 6 buildings up at Beacon. My numbers are a little bit off, but if the yellow really is that's the number that talks to the number of permits issued for
growth.
the state
Yeah.
requirements.
And the growth and the state requirement says building permit, or it says growth permit, or it just says permit.
I have it right here, and
Well, that's okay. We can talk since we don't have much time. We can take that offline.
Okay.
And so I think, yeah, it was a good first start. I have a couple of comments. One of the things that clearly really hasn't been taken up in the past is the impact on public safety and the impact on access to natural resources. So I think that those two things need to be taken into account. You may or may not have been at the FinCom meeting that the fire chief was at, and he talked about the growth in town, as well as that they haven't taken into account even what's going on at the Downs at this point. So those conversations, I think, are very important. Yeah, I mean, I in terms of a final comment, just for this quick thing, one other quick question, Jay. So are you saying that like something like Magnolia Place would not have been counted at all because there was at some point a 55 and over that didn't count in any total? Is that correct? Or because you said Hillcrest might not have counted because there might have been a senior.
Yeah, it didn't count in terms of growth permits. It counts in terms of permits. So
would that be true of like
so
Magnolia Place?
Magnolia Place, frankly, I started in 2007. Magnolia Place, I think, was fully built out at that time. So it doesn't, I think Magnolia Place would show.
Are they even an over 55? I know that Juneberry's not.
So prior to
Okay.
So prior to the 08 amendments, senior housing, as I recall it, and again, we can take a look at the language in further depth, but prior to the 08 amendments, senior housing didn't have to get a growth permit, but we would have tracked it in terms of a building permit. We would know how many units.
So I'd just like to see where that language would be, because I think that's interesting, because clearly it impacts traffic and things like that. So it's not in the GMO, as we saw.
No.
And where is it? So if that's still in place, that to me is a factor, and I would just.
Okay, I'm gonna have to cut
Yeah,
this
I would
off
love
here.
to see the council have a workshop on this, and I want to see the ordinance committee and the council stay out in front of the range planning, and then feed back to them, where we're looking for their input.
Yeah, we're gonna meet the, I'll throw this in there since you introduced it, Betsy. The August 20th ordinance meeting will be dealing with growth management. So, okay. All right. Where are we? We need to let staff know where we're gonna go from this point. I'm just gonna put out there that in my reading of comments and what I'm hearing, I mean, these are great questions. I do agree with that last slide. It's got some great things to pursue. The counselors have asked some good questions there, but it seems like fractionalization is something to be looking at. That reserve carryover, impact fees, which isn't in this particular ordinance, but is related. And then, of course, I always hear about traffic. So I'm not sure how that works in, but I'm going to throw this now to, let's start with Counselor Johnson. What would you like them to come back with in August?
I wasn't prepared to give you a list today. My understanding was
that's fine.
that we were formulating a formal request to long-range planning for their advice and comment.
Yeah, and we can do that too.
But I didn't. That wasn't the result of today, correct? That's not for tomorrow, because I think I heard that.
Yeah, tomorrow, Jay, what was your thinking we should be doing tomorrow with long-range planning? Is bring them up to date on what we discussed today?
Sure. Yep. I was going to run through this presentation, sort of talk, that last slide, see if they identify other pieces of information that they, based on their experiences, might be helpful as part of the conversation. And I guess I was wondering if tonight we might not have an understanding of what the expectation for the long-range planning committee would be through the process. Is the expectation that they sort of take the early laboring ore and do a lot of sort of the outreach and analysis, and then come back to the committee with that information and recommendations? Or is it that they, that we sort of keep them engaged and informed but really that the ordinance committee is going to take the laboring oar. I guess that'd be helpful to understand how that, what the expectation is.
Let me, what's your, I'm gonna ask Mr. Johnson and then Mr. Hamel, your thoughts.
Yep.
on that.
Yep, I understand the long-range planning committee is part of the process in the review of the growth management ordinance. I look at the committee as an advisory. I do believe the members on there have been there for a while, so I feel comfortable in getting to them, which was my understanding, a list of questions that we would like to hear their take on it, their advice, their thoughts. I'm not looking, we're not looking for a long drawn out process with, getting pulse of the community. I think the councilors have got the pulse, but thanks for asking. But that's my expectation, Jean Marie.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fair. Dawn?
Yeah, I would like to build on some of the comments that Ken has made and others have made. Yeah, I think that we need some direction from the Long Range Planning Committee. I work for a company though, however, and I know that there's a tendency to jump to solutions. Okay, there's a tendency to say, well, we really ought to consider moratorium. We ought to consider, fractionalization, eliminating the carryover pool, you name it. Okay, it's a handful of half a dozen things. I think there's a need for us to define the problem statement a little bit more carefully, and I'd like long range help us with that. Otherwise, we run the risk of jumping on something we think is going to solve the problem.
That's right.
Yeah, good point. Excellent point. Tom?
Just quickly, I believe Jay circulated the amendments from 2008 today. Interestingly enough, it was June 18th, 2008. So 12 years ago today was the public hearing on these changes. I might direct your attention back to that because it speaks to the elderly household piece of it. And it's just an interesting piece of the history along the way. The other point, just from a process point of view, I wasn't here, but I was told for obvious reasons, the development community is quite interested in this conversation. One of the last times, certainly the first time this growth management ordinance was put in place, there was a fair amount of controversy late in that process. And the end result, so I'm told, and this is a bit of urban legend, was a bit of a negotiation. So from a process point of view, I would recommend we maybe throw it to long range to suggest ways to pull that perspective into the conversation sooner than later to avoid any kind of last minute challenges. They obviously have a vested interest in this, and they might be a resource to help you understand different aspects.
Good point.
Yeah, thank you. That is a good point.
I have a quick question for our town manager, if I may.
Please do.
The master of the process, sir. If the in-flight development, regardless of the stage of it is, pre-approval, approval, whatever, if all those permits, once they come to fruition, are satisfied, and that this is a hypothetical, purely a hypothetical, and that reserve pool went to zero, what's the process for the next developer that comes in and there are no growth permits? What's the process?
Well, I don't think your question is process related. I think it's more legal related, and I'm not qualified to answer it.
Okay, well, this is the way I read the GMO, that if that ever happens, it comes to the council.
Right, I guess if I may, as you just pointed out, Councilor Johnson, it's the council has the authority or ability to add to the reserve pool if you see fit.
Okay.
The way that the growth management ordinance works, however, is if we always have in the reserve pool 20 growth permits dedicated for affordable housing.
Right.
So if it goes to zero at the end of this year, let's just say, at the start of the next year, without any action by council, there would be 20 available growth permits for affordable housing projects only. So what happens when, to your point, if the reserve pool goes to zero, I'll use the zero, understanding there's a 24 affordable housing, and a number of market rate projects come forward that, numbers 300, essentially the way the growth permit says is as of, the first of the year, we take applications first come, first served until we get to 135. If we get to 135 and there's still 165, we approved 300 units and there's 165 waiting, they would have to wait till 2022 to apply for a growth permit. Again,
But the planning board couldn't come to the town council?
town council could always consider adding to the reserve pool, sure.
Okay, gotcha.
yeah,
Then
that
they have
could
to be, okay, gotcha.
Dr.
Thank you.
Johnson, the reason I mentioned legal is, in that scenario Jay paints, as was mentioned, development goes through cycles. And as we saw
Yeah.
through the multifamily, having them wait 2 and 3 years for an available permit in a particular scenario may lose the market, so to speak. So
Okay.
I wouldn't be
I never
surprised.
suggested that.
No, but I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised if presented with that scenario, development community might have some real challenges because the economics of their proposal, their project is maybe unworkable.
Oh, that's correct, but I do understand that the town of Scarborough, or any town, definitely has an inherent right to preserve its infrastructure, the safety of its people. So I get it. There's always a balance with everything, Tom.
It does. Again, the question you asked was approvals in hand,
Yeah.
and then the ability to execute. And I think that's different. If someone knows before they even apply that they'd have to wait, that's a different conversation, I think.
Right, okay.
All right,
Thank you.
I hate to say I'm like Cinderella here with midnight coming up and I gotta fly off. Where are we going from here? I'll go to long range planning tomorrow. Dawn, are you gonna come to long range planning also?
I don't know yet.
Okay, I'll definitely be at long range planning. And we will lay out for them how we're looking for advice from them. Jay and I will, we'll talk. I want us to continue to think through what our questions and concerns are and forward them. To me, it'd be great if we forwarded them to Jay and CC the council and Tom on your thoughts, questions, because this is a process, as Dawn said, Jean Marie has a tendency to jump right to the end sometimes, but we do have a process in between.
He
And
never
as I
said that.
said, I want to dedicate the August 20th meeting to this topic. So by then we've got a couple of months to massage and get stuff in. Does that feel okay to folks?
It's a start.
Okay, Dawn, you okay?
I'm okay with that. I think we just need to be clear. They need to help us define the problem statement and the potential solutions. And then
Yeah.
what we're trying to solve for,
Why don't, Dawn, do you want to draft something up and I'll help you with it? I
sentences.
know you've got a lot right now, but I know you're more into the language of how that works than I am.
So let me circulate something where,
Okay,
give us and Jay,
yeah,
and get
okay,
them, before
okay.
tomorrow.
Awesome.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, everybody. I think this is very interesting. I thought it went well. Jay, I hope you're feeling okay. I know you've been under the freaking gun here with everything going on, which is not a bad thing. And everyone knows where to find me if they have any complaints or questions. And I think, we need to, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Hamel,
Yes.
Ms. Katerina says yes. Thank you, everybody.